Hello there, I'm Appleflip from youtube.com/NickyvMLP and welcome to How DHX Should Have Wrote, where I look back at infamous missed opportunities in Friendship is Magic and talk about how I'd do it differently because I'm a smartass. One of the tips I've always said for people in a creative funk is to step back and try and find inspiration from other things you may like. For example, my Butterfly Effect series was inspired by a series on NFL.com called the NIfL, where Dave Dameshek took a major event in NFL history and changed it up to see how great the ripple effect would be. Well, I've been a fan of the How WWE Should Have Booked series from What Culture's Adam Blampier for a while, so much so that I did my own video in that style on the Haymakers channel, and I thought, could I make this work with the ponies? And the answer is a resounding, well, we'll see. So for my first video in this series, I'm going to start with an episode that maybe wasn't the worst episode of all time for me, but it's an episode that probably isn't very high on a lot of people's lists of good episodes. Somepony to Watch Over Me. At the start of the episode, the Apple family get together and decide that Apple Bloom is old enough to stay home by herself while AJ and Big Mac make a delivery of pies and Granny Smith visits a family member out of town. Before they leave, they give Bloom a list of chores to do, but once AJ and Mac leave, Applejack can't stop worrying about Apple Bloom and decides to come back home. Meanwhile, at the farm, Bloomy has finished all of her chores and decides to have some fun with the house to herself. But when AJ storms in, AB knocks over some food, making a mess and making AJ think that she was in over her head. From there, Applejack babies Apple Bloom for the next few scenes that get more and more infuriating the longer it goes on, so Bloomy decides to redeem herself by making AJ's pie run for her that she didn't do when she came back home. Sweetie and Scoots run interference for Bloom so that she can slip out without AJ being any the wiser, and when AJ finds out, she flips her lid and goes after her, which is admittedly the only reasonable thing she's done all episode. Bloomy's going through the swamp and it's getting more and more perilous, and she ends up running into a chimera. Applejack comes in to save the day, chases off the chimera, and the two sisters complete the delivery together, even though Apple Bloom was in so much trouble. There was a couple of great moments in here. The Crusaders bounced off of one another so well they could practically finish each other's sentences by this point in the series, and the fight between Applejack and the Chimera was a lot of fun. But Applejack was insufferable in the second act of the episode, and Apple Bloom didn't make herself look good in that last act. And by the end of the episode, everyone looked worse than they did when the episode started. And I can do it better. The episode would start basically the same, with the Apple family deciding to leave Apple Bloom alone at the farm while everyone else leaves. But instead of just AJ and Mac delivering the pies, all three of the elder Apples go to make the delivery. That could lead to some gag where Granny tries to pull a full cart of pies, but AJ and Mac sneakily take a couple of pies and put it on their carts. I don't know, could be funny. So they leave Apple Bloom with her chores, and she knocks them out like they're no big deal, like she did in the real episode. Meanwhile, AJ, Mac, and Granny are walking through the woods when Apple Bloom gets brought up, and they start to get a bit worried, but AJ says she trusts Bloomy. Granny, though, isn't so sure, and after panicking a bit, she decides to go back to the farm to make sure AB's okay, taking her cart with her. When Granny arrives back home, she finds Apple Bloom playing with Sweetie Belle and Scootaloo, and she's immediately skeptical that she was actually able to do all of her chores that quickly. Granny inspects the house, trying to find flaws in Apple Bloom's work, and ends up nitpicking her work so much that Granny decides that Bloomy hasn't done any of the work right, and that she is in fact not old enough to stay home alone. The next few scenes show Granny teaching Apple Bloom stuff she clearly already knows, and Bloom getting more and more annoyed. To me, this would be a lot better than Applejack child-proofing Apple Bloom's life, because Granny has been shown to be really stubborn, and it would be believable to me that Granny would think that AB isn't doing the work the way she would do it. After a while, Granny lies down for a nap, leaving the Crusaders to their own devices, and Apple Bloom is still pissed. She is in full "I'll show you" mode, and decides to deliver the pies that Granny brought back home, as a way of showing Granny that she can do the work just as well as Granny can. Sweetie and Scoots try to tell her it's a bad idea and that the swamp is dangerous, but she is determined to prove Granny wrong. She leaves with the pies, while Sweetie and Scoots cover for her in the same way they did in the real episode. Also, I think that they could realistically fool Granny way more than they could fool Applejack. AB starts going through the woods, and after a while she takes a brief rest and looks through the supply crate in her cart to find some food. And after digging through the flame-proof boots, the lion tamer's chair, and the snake charmer's flute, she finds a hunk of ricotta cheese and decides it's better than nothing and chows down on it. And wouldn't you know it, that pesky chimera decides that now's a great time to steal Bloomy's pies. Meanwhile, in the bayou village that the apples were delivering the pies to, Applejack and Big Mac are starting to wonder when Granny's going to come back with the rest of the pies. So Big Mac stays in the village to sell the remainder of the pies they do have, while AJ makes a dash to the farm to pick up Granny's wagon, bringing her empty cart with her so that they don't have an awkward number of carts to bring back home. On her way there, AJ hears Apple Bloom getting chased by the chimera and leaps into action. Apple Bloom watches as Applejack fends off the chimera before realizing, wait, I have all those same tools. So Applejack and Apple Bloom fight the chimera together. Afterwards, AJ is a bit peeved that Apple Bloom would try to make the pie run by herself, but would then be impressed that she was still able to do most of the journey herself. Applejack and Apple Bloom would finish the delivery to Bayou Town, and everyone is happy. Except Granny, who eventually realizes she's been tricked by Sweetie and Scoots, races to find AJ and Mac, and finds Apple Bloom safely with her older siblings. And maybe you can close with a "Who's watching the farm?" gag, where Sweetie and Scoots are at the farm trying to buck apples or something. Ha ha ha, they're not Earth ponies, they can't do that. And that is the episode. You make Applejack seem loyal and trusting, which was the vibe that Sisterhoof Social gave off, while also keeping the sweet chimera fight. Apple Bloom comes off as headstrong and capable, if a bit reckless, which isn't the worst thing. The only character who actually looks less than stellar from this would be Granny Smith, but it would be in a way that would more accurately fit her character than what happened in the real episode with AJ. So that is how I would write Somepony to watch over me. Let me know what you guys thought, and tell me which other episodes you'd like me to do. Thanks, and I'll see y'all later.